This is the Etiology podcast. I am your host, Elka Kubaku, licensed social worker and psychotherapist. In this podcast, we explore divisive issues around food, health, and body image with the goal of mending relationships within the eating disorder recovery professional community and creating a space where a multiplicity of perspectives can coexist harmoniously. This podcast is uncensored and encompasses the political and ideological spectrum. If you believe something you hear is harmful or misinformed, please be respectful to the speaker. And also, feel free to reach out about recording another episode on the same topic from your vantage point. My hope is that if, as professionals, we can hold each other's stories with respect and compassion, we'll be better able to do so for our clients. How do you know? So many challenges to any particular position boil down to this question. How do you know that what you're saying is accurate? How do you know that the modality you're using is effective? In the medical and academic communities, we're often taught that the only acceptable answer to this question is scientific study, preferably double-blinded, and or within a randomized control trial. But there are other types of knowing. The knowing that lives within one's own gut, the knowing that is passed down through millennia of history, the knowing that is found within the collective. And while the particulars of an intuited, spiritual, or collective experience cannot be generalized, the question, how do you know, extends to how we teach our clients to know. Do we encourage them to trust the experts, to believe only in what is written in peer-reviewed journals? Or do we help clients get in touch with the knowing that comes from deep within themselves? In this episode, Dana Sedlick shares how spiritual practices helped facilitate her own recovery. She talks about how these differ from and complement traditional therapy, and describes particular alternative healing methods, including sound healing and biofield tuning. We discuss the challenges of translating spiritual practices into traditional therapy settings, and the importance of creating space for clients who are so inclined to integrate spirituality with the growth they achieve in therapy. Dana is a licensed clinical social worker and certified eating disorder specialist, and consultant with over a decade of experience in the mental health field. She has led multidisciplinary teams and developed comprehensive treatment programs for eating disorders and co-occurring mental health conditions. Dana offers individual clinical supervision and mentorship for clinical teams. She also provides consulting to help organizations develop and implement effective mental health and eating disorder treatment programs. Hi, Dana. Thanks for coming on today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Can you start by just telling me a little bit about what you do in the eating disorder recovery world?
Yes, I am a therapist, and I've been in the field for a little bit over a decade. And then I also have a consulting business where I focus on supporting organizations and programs develop new strategies and solutions, building out curriculum and programs, really helping them strengthen their eating disorder background and expertise in order to help more people recover.
Very cool. What kind of organizations do you work with?
Anywhere from I work with some schools, I work with some mental health programs, private practices, really kind of across the gamut of just people who don't have knowledge and education, or maybe have just limited knowledge and education, or looking to incorporate it more into their current practice.
Very cool.
Yeah.
We're talking today about spiritual practices in recovery. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts and beliefs are about that.
I feel like it's been a long journey of getting to this place, and I feel like I never would have imagined I'd be someone who believes almost in some of these things, which is why I think having this conversation is really cool, because I think we often have a lot of stigma around what it means to engage in any type of like spiritual or alternative practices. And so I'm excited to just get the word out about some of these things that I think can be really helpful. I feel like as a therapist, of course, I support therapy, and of course, I believe in therapy. And I think that there are just so many things that are left untapped that we're not able to access or even imagine can be helpful. And I think I really want to kind of challenge that narrative as much as possible, and to also see that alternative techniques, experiences are not threats to therapy. They don't take away from the work that we're doing in the therapy room. And I think sometimes our egos can feel like, if I recommend this other thing, will that be more helpful almost than what therapy is? And I think we get scared of that sometimes. And so I hope to kind of challenge that by talking about it today. But
Yeah.
spirituality to me is just another place where we can connect to something outside of ourselves. And I think when we have such a difficult relationship with ourselves and even sort of recovery and healing, we often need something else. And right, for some people, that's religion. And oftentimes there's a lot of people who are looking for something that feels like religion, but isn't religion. And so spirituality can help them really access what that means to them and allows them to take a journey of that personalization specific to their experience.
That so much resonates with me, and I remember, and I still have this to some degree, but this like feeling of looking for something that's bigger than me, or looking for something more that you can't quite name, and you can't really find answers to that in science. Maybe an eating disorder, so much gets attached to the body and appearance and all of that, but something that we have beyond that, and also just something that makes it worth it.
Worth it. Yeah. So, like purpose, right? When we talk about a life of purpose, having a connection to a larger picture really changes things, right? I know for me in my life, when I'm going through really hard things, just the idea of like, this can't possibly be here to like ruin me or wreck my life, that immediately helps to quell a little bit, right, of the emotional sting of something. Of course, it doesn't take it away, but being able to tap into that larger picture helps me just ground in that, right? And helps me ground into being able to challenge maybe my own negative beliefs about myself, right? In a way that isn't just intellectualizing. And I think especially a lot of us who have recovered from eating disorders or might have certain temperaments, right? I'm a very strong intellectualizer and I can be in my head all day long. You're laughing, right? Because I imagine you might be like that.
Totally. Yeah.
Yep. And that's really comfortable for me. And so I think spirituality was really outside of the box because it's forced me to not know how to do that on myself. And I've needed that as I've continued to just work on myself as I age and get further into my own healing experience.
Yeah, so much of that resonates with me, when I'm definitely, like, massive intellectualizer, and what intellect does is it contains. We can, and that's what so much of Western healing is built on. We can name the systems, categorize them based on systems or syndromes that appear to go together, and then come up with solutions based on that. And when we go to spirituality or things that go beyond us, it's almost like pulling out of those boxes or containers.
Yes, that's so well said because I think it asks us to look at things that don't quite make sense in a way that we like things to make sense. And I find that at the beginning, I was a little bit more like hyper fixated on like understanding some of these practices that I now engage in. And now, like externally understanding them, like reading about them and understanding like the science behind them, which I never feel like I fully even could do, which was again a blessing, I think, for me because it forces me again to actually believe my own experience of it. And I think there is so much power in just that alone. Because again, in the work that we're doing in eating disorder treatment, there's such a lack of self-trust. There's such a lack of understanding and trusting our experience and the fact that my experience doesn't have to be someone else's experience instead of using that as a reason that that's not a truthful experience. It gets to be like, no, this is my experience and I've lived that and I understand that and I can trust that.
Yeah. And you might not be able to generalize that to other people in the way that you can with, let's say, a scientific study that looked at hundreds of people with the same experience or using the same intervention. But the perspective that guides you to trust that within yourself can also help you teach others to trust what their experience is, whether it looks similar or different from yours.
Mhm, mhm. Right. Like clients will often come in and be like, I saw this thing and it was a sign, right? And then suddenly you'll see them like shrink into themselves and be like, well, like, is that weird? Like, should it not be a sign? Like, am I making that up? Right. And I'm always like, yeah, but if you believe that was a sign, that's all the belief that's needed, right? Like if that thing feels meaningful to you, why are we again going to try to intellectualize it? When if you saw, oftentimes people will be like certain like birds or animals, right? If you saw this animal and it represents this thing to you, you get to determine that that's a source of comfort. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting here and having my own explanation around that. And again, I just think having those adjunctant areas to be able to pull upon when things are really hard, it's meaningful.
Yeah.
And of course, I know we're going to talk about specific spiritual practices. I just think that they provide a lot of adjunctive support that's needed.
For sure. Yeah, there are a few different things that we're starting to touch on. You had started mentioning hesitation as someone who likes to understand things intellectual when you can't quite find an explanation to that.
Yeah.
Also, some fear within the professional community, which where that lands for me or where I find that coming up for myself is more so, and this can be different for other people, but as a therapist, and I think most people in this profession have bumped up against our limitations, found a place where it's like, um, I don't know that I don't know even fix this because we don't work so much in the fixing space, more in the holding, but um, yeah, bumped up in our own limitations, the extent to which we can help people transform themselves. So when, for me, when I see something that claims to have the answers, that's like, and sometimes marketing tends to do that. You have this problem, nothing else worked, and like this is going to not just change whatever your symptoms, but change you at the deepest, most fundamental level so that you will live in pure peace and bliss. That's where I tend to be a little bit like, I don't know, can we promise that?
Yes, yes. Yes, yes. And do you feel like, where do you feel like that shows up? Like, do you feel like that shows up in spiritual places, or what's kind of your connection of how you see that?
So for me, I I think I started out believing everything. I probably moved in the opposite direction as you actually, and I'm still drawn to spirituality, so I don't discount it. And also when we talk about like cultural competence and things like that, different ways of knowing, so knowing that's passed down from generations, knowing that's contained in our bodies, I believe in that. Where I've been to, like, such different like, I'm remembering a point in my life where I was, like, going through a hard time and really desperate, and had spoken to a friend of mine who she was, like in hypnotherapy, we'd call it suggestibility, but where, the degree to which you're receptive influences how much you'll take, so she was, like, so suggestible, anything she ever went to worked for her, and I had followed in her footsteps, and I had wound up in the office of this person who was, like, some sort of magnetic healing, and there actually is, like, a scientific version of transcranial magnetic whatever, but this was, like I don't even know, she had, like, these magnetic strips and, like, put them on me and was sort of, like after, like, 15 minutes, like, "Okay, better," and I tried to get an understanding of, like, "Where does this come from? Like, how did you do it?" And she gave me, like, some very vague answers and some brochure that said something about, like, neural pathways or something. And so, I've definitely gotten more discernment in that area.
Yeah.
But tell me about your process because 'cause you've moved from skepticism to more belief.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah. Yeah. And now I find that I'm like reaching for these experiences that I have, like when I'm having my hardest time, which to me is
Mhm.
also so profound that it's like my body craves them. Like it's no longer this feeling of just like, okay, I need to like talk about my experience. It's like, no, I need to go to a place where my body feels safe. And that's actually the top priority. Which when I think again about like treatment and recovery, it makes so much sense. Like being in the body when I was in my eating disorder wasn't safe. And so now that I'm recovered, like doing this next level of work again, because I again just believe like we're always healing, we're always developing a relationship with ourselves. I like want to be in my body more and I want to be in my body in a really safe way and have those places I can go to that create that for me because I think I still struggle with I think as so many of us like how do we just create that for ourselves in a really supportive peaceful way especially just by proxy of like living in the busy chaotic world that we live in. And so I think just the more experiences I've had with some of these things, the more I believe in them, and there's no way of really talking myself out of them. So the first time sound healing is something, right, that I really consistently use for my own practice now. I didn't really have much awareness of it, I would say, until I went to Arizona maybe like 5 years ago. And I went to this hotel that essentially had like journaling classes all day and like feng shui and sound healing and all these kind of new modalities per se. Obviously, journaling is not, but self care. They had sound healing every single night. If you ever been to Arizona, it's like the perfect place
Been there.
on healing. And I just feel like I'm like chasing that feeling sometimes because it was so magical. But the first time I ever had a sound bath, I was just so like in awe of the experiences that I was feeling in my body and this brand new way that I had never experienced, both emotionally and physically. And I think when you have that type of experience, it's really hard to talk yourself out of that. I remember just like tears like coming down the side of my face halfway through. And like in the moment, there was not a conscious awareness of I thought about A and it created me to feel sad. It was just this cathartic release that I was feeling. It was this feeling of like stress, anger, sadness was just releasing from my body without me intellectually doing that work and getting stuck in some of those stories. So it felt almost like a hands-off experience where something right larger than me, which really was my body and the sound instruments, was allowing me to access these things in myself that day to day I was not able to access.
Like something inside you was unlocked.
Yeah. And sound healing, right? Like there's a way that it targets our sympathetic nervous system. And I think, again, we miss a lot of nervous system work sometimes. And so having that, um, again, it almost like it skipped over this barrier that I would say is my brain and my mind and really just got straight to the core of my human experience, like my soul. And it just feels like it allows me to connect to my soul more. It allows me to connect to like what me underneath all of that um, actually needs and wants and desires, which again, I think is very hard to slow down the world enough in meditation. We're able to do that a lot of the times, right? But outside of that, it's really hard to get to what that truth is. And so I find something like sound healing, right, where it's an hour, 30 minutes to an hour of laying down, being in a meditative state, having sound actually heal our cells. Even if you're just meditating for that time, I always say, if that's the worst thing that happens and you come out and you meditated, wow, we have really positive things that come out of that.
Right, just the silence. And
Uh-huh.
we know with meditation is something that's a little bit crossed the bridge between this type of deeper knowing and the scientific world, but just those moments of not just moments, but having a solid amount of time where you're in silence and where some of those thoughts or just our typical limited or congested ways of being in the world can start to fade out
Yes.
and you can see what's underneath it. And then it sounds like the sound has some taps into something
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
helps you get there.
Yeah. I think, I mean, again, scientifically, I'm like, I read about this, if it's still so confusing. But I'm like, the sound essentially taps it, like the sound taps into our cells in a way that helps the cells um, relax,
Yeah.
right? In many ways. And that's what allows us to get into kind of this deeper dreamlike state. And so a lot of the times it'll also just feel like there aren't thoughts, but there are dreams. And I'll have experiences where I just have like really strong imagery that has nothing to do with my life in any way. And so I'm not kind of imagining, right, like my day to day experience. And it causes me to get curious, I think, right? Like after it causes me to really also use my imagination and use kind of that as a tool to ask what that might have meant for me. And sometimes there's not a deeper answer, right? Sometimes it really is like my body just truly needed a reset and I got that. And that's really kind of like the end of that. And then sometimes it's, wow, I really felt the energy like move through my body because have you been to a sound bath before?
No, like a
Okay.
little bit of sound meditation, but not
Okay.
anything that intensive.
Okay. So there's this feeling that they talk about that I didn't know, which again, I'm happy I didn't read about before because I probably wouldn't have believed it. But there's this feeling you get where it feels like full body chills. And it literally is the energy moving through the body. And the concept of like sound hitting your body and moving through it is crazy when you think like for me, I feel like that feels crazy that that's real. Um, and you feel it so viscerally, unlike anything I felt in my entire life. And so it's literally like there will be parts of your body where you may feel it in your arms or your legs. And then sometimes afterwards, at the beginning, when I didn't know much about it, like I would look up what does it mean that I felt like the sound in like my left shin. And there would be spiritual answers about that every time really kind of connected back to my experience. And so then it also positively reinforced what it is that I had experienced that helped me then also believe in it more.
That's so wild. So there are two types of knowing that you're tapping into here. One is just knowing my experience and what I feel in my body. And the other is it sounds like there's some sort of spiritual body of knowledge that you were referencing back. What was that?
Yeah. I don't know.
Or what the program that you had gone to or whatever that place was,
Oh,
what based on a particular spiritual, I don't know, school of thought or
it wasn't.
views.
It really was just, what we would call wellness per se. Um, but it was very like they use instruments that I would say are not typically found like where I live now in Nashville, right? In like a city, it's always slightly different. I feel like it still is like a little bit more progressive in some ways. And I think in Arizona, right, just this idea of like nature, again, it's not like a spiritual practice, of course, but like there's this embodiment of like being one with the world, almost like being stripped away of things that kind of just felt more present. Like even just the atmosphere of like the rooms I always talk about, like we were in this like very large pitch black room. Um, and even things like that make such a big difference. Like now when I am going to a sound bath and if I'm kind of like body to body, I find it harder to really tap into my own energetic experience because I am feeling connected um, to the other person's experience more. And so I do think that there were kind of aspects of that that made it also easier for me to do that, where I can see I bring friends to sound baths all the time that have never gone. And I'm always like, you're going to love this. And sometimes they have a really hard time at first because maybe you are body to body, or you might be in a place where like you hear all the cars passing by and it creates some of those barriers to, I think, really settling into yourself. And so I also feel like I had a really unique experience of getting to do that in a really safe, quiet place for quite some time that I think has allowed me to then access it more easily now in my life as well.
Yeah, and that taps into something that seems to be pretty universal in terms of spiritual practice, which is a kind of self-transcendence and interconnection, where the barriers that close me off and separate me from you start to fade away. And we feel a sense of, even when you're describing sound as if it's permeating your body, there's this experience that the world is not a bunch of separate objects that we're acting on or being acted on by, but this interconnected web of energy that we're able to tap into and connect with and be a part of.
Yeah, that's so well said.
Yeah. When you're looking things up, like I felt this in my left leg, and where, like, what were the sources that you were looking at?
Yeah, there's a lot of, there's just a large spiritual community. And so, there's certain like people per se that I like follow per se, or just like spiritual guides that I personally have just connected with over time. And then I also I do biofield tuning, which of course we can talk into too. And so I have a lot of similar conversations in my work with my biofield tuner that feel um, like they do reinforce that too, because oftentimes things are energetically coming up in our body in certain places that are stories that we are not paying attention to. And so then I also can start to see patterns, as well as with acupuncture, right? Of like, okay, if something's continuously coming up in my left shin, again, just making that up, right? But like, there's probably some truth to that because I'm experiencing that in all these different places and modalities. And so the more I can kind of educate myself to see what might be some of those answers, the stronger I start to feel like, okay, how do I pay attention to that? And that doesn't always mean that that is my truth, right? I feel like you can very clearly say, like, that doesn't apply to me at all. And it doesn't feel like it suddenly becomes your truth when it's not. And it allows me to just be curious enough of like, is there an aspect of that that is my truth that needs a little bit more of my paying attention to?
Yeah. So there are a few different modalities that you're looking at in terms of this kind of wisdom or I don't know, understanding spirituality, but tapping into it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like in some way translating it into intellectual language that can look for patterns and figure things out. What is biofield tuning?
Yeah. Okay. So biopill tuning is even probably harder to explain. So it's essentially this concept that like we all are energetic beings, right? And we all have essentially like an energetic field around us. Um, and that energetic field holds aspects of our lives that have been kind of like cut off from us. And so when we think about like trauma, that is something that our energetic field holds around us and is often not integrated into us. So bioflow tuning essentially does the work of identifying what is in our field and what needs to happen to help us integrate that back into ourselves, essentially to get back to ourselves. And they do that through tuning forks. And so, again, which is like similar in some ways to some sound baths. And so then instead of us like rehashing essentially the thing that they've noticed, we do some work that's around affirmations around that in tandem with the tuning forks to essentially heal that energetic part of us that is not broken, but maybe wounded or just needing some support around. And so it won't be like, okay, now I'm opening this can of worms around this topic that I need to talk about. It might just be, okay, in your biofield, we're seeing that around age 8, you really struggled with something like sensitivity. And then we're doing the work of how is that showing up in your current life? And what are the blocks that are preventing you from healing that? And then that's the thing that we're healing through the biofield.
Let me try to
Yeah.
repeat it back to you. I know, as you said, it's an experiential process.
Yeah.
It's, hard to capture and hard to capture it with someone who's never experienced it, seen it before. But so we have this energy field around us that is carrying a lot of we've experienced but haven't integrated.
Yes.
And the way that I think of that as you're talking is maybe we all have some kind of energy that we're projecting at a very simple level. So I might walk near someone and just feel this kind of tension. And we'll see it in more subtle ways in their body. Maybe they're moving in like very rigid type movements or things like that. Just for example. And those are things that we might not be able to identify consciously. Like I'm not trying to project this tension, but it's something that lives around me or that surrounds me. It's something that I project into the world.
Yes.
So when you're doing this biofield tuning, you'll tap into that or feel what that energy is, what it contains,
Mhm,
access some of the memories associated with it.
mhm, mhm.
And then what was the tuning
Yep.
for?
And they use the tuning forks to essentially like heal that part of yourself.
What is the tuning fork?
Oh gosh, how do you explain what a tuning fork is?
Is it like it's a physical object?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes, yes, and it's all around sound. So there's essentially like sound levels for like anxiety and depression. Like anxiety, you can imagine is like a super high pitched, like ee type of sound, and like a depression sound, right, is like a lower bass sound. So they essentially use a variety of those tuning forks to help calibrate you.
Mhm. So if you were, let's say you had anxiety, would they then play the really high pitched one, or would they play a lower one to start to like down regulate the high pitch, or how does that work?
That's what I think, though you're not actually like talking about that, so I can't say for sure. But oftentimes she'll play back, like um, you can hear the pitch. She's not calling it that, right? But she'll be like, "This is where you are right now," and she'll use the tuning fork, and you're like, "Oh, I can like feel that in my body." And then when it moves through, you can hear how the sound almost like levels out. And so we'll practice an affirmation. And so I don't know if this is consistent with everybody, but the Biofield, the person that I work, the affirmation is something along the lines of, I forgive myself for ever judging myself for, and then we fill it in. And then it becomes because the truth is, and then we answer that. And again, we're not processing. So it really is like, what are the answers that come up right away? Because that's the subconscious, right? That we're trying to actually get to. And then we can see through the tuning forks, is that kind of the right thing? Like, am I using the words that are authentic to me? Or am I still kind of masking in some way, and actually I need to get a little bit more under the hood? And then when we get to that, the tuning fork allows the sound to just be this very, like, peaceful, um, level-headed noise almost.
That's really interesting. So what we did another episode on spirituality as well with Haley Sheik, and what I'm hearing that in some ways sounds similar is there are cognitive therapeutic aspects to it and things that we might traditionally see in therapy. So this like letting what comes up in your gut, we see like letting that come, not trying to monitor. We see that in psychoanalytic therapy where we have free association, just letting what comes come, not trying to intellectualize it. We see it also in a lot of the like internal family systems, somatic experiencing, which are in some ways closer to spiritual practice. And then you have the affirmations,
Yeah.
which sounds a little more like mantra meditation, or in some ways a more meditative practice rather than, though it maybe has components of cognitive therapy where we're trying to reframe our thoughts, but there's less analysis and more speaking or maybe repeating the same line.
Yes.
And then you have an energetic component that you or the healer are tapping into to check, is this really landing? Is there a shift in what my body is carrying and what's being projected from me?
Yes, absolutely, because the healer may start it off, and they may say something of what they think is coming up. And then it's my job to still say, is that my truth or not? Too, right? And so there's so much autonomy and a feeling of it is my knowing. And it's also not the healer's job to analyze that in a way that allows me again to intellectualize or allows me to now tell a whole story about the thing that we're talking about, right? And again, for those of us who might have been in therapy for a long time, sometimes it feels that way, that we're just like telling a story. And when we tell a story, we can't really tap into the emotional experience after we've told the story so many
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
Or we might not even know that it's a story that needs to be told, which is something that I experience a lot in Biofield, right? It's often not moments that I may go in and I may want to like talk about this thing, but that's not actually what my energetic experience needs to talk about. So it challenges that part of me too of I could come in and talk circles around, I'm stressed about this thing. That might be easy for me to do. And I may think that that's fruitful. And the fact that my body or my soul is saying, actually, this other thing over here is the place that you need to do some work without also getting stuck on that, because it really is just you have the session, you do that work, it clears that energy. And then the next time you go back, you don't go back to that work all the time. There's certain themes that continue, but it's not that now I need to talk about that experience when I was 8 again, unless that's something that energetically I do continue to need to work through.
Yeah. There's an experience of something can be legitimately cleared up, or and I don't need to come back and retell the same stories over and over. Or there's a point in therapy where people can feel like, okay, like I've listed all of my complaints already. What's it's like talking is not enough, and I've definitely seen that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it helps to just again, I'm thinking of how at the beginning you were saying, like, we don't want it to feel magical, and, like, I am not by any means saying it's magical because you don't have to go back to it, and I do believe that there are some things that don't need 5 sessions of therapy to actually find relief from. Um, Especially if you've done work in other areas, right? Especially if you are going to therapy and there's still this missing piece, right? Or you are doing all these other things. That it's like you have a conscious awareness of it already that makes enough sense that allows you to feel like you can find relief and healing from it in this other way that you don't have to go back to that conscious conversation about it.
Yeah, so you're starting to touch on integrating this with more traditional therapy. And traditional therapy is also changing. It's kind of a hard word to use because somatic and more integrated or subconscious body-based approaches are becoming a lot more normalized. And in some ways were present earlier on as well, but got replaced with things like cognitive behavioral.
Yeah.
When you're talking about like setting those expectations, and it sounds like to some extent tapping into spiritual practices has probably expanded your expectations of what's possible.
Yes.
Can you tell me about if you were to conceptualize within yourself what of me are what we might call perpetual problems, like things that will get triggered in certain situations, and I just work on reconnecting to myself or like the sort of the work of being alive? And what are things that are like
Mhm.
I've crossed that bridge or I've healed that wound and I don't really need to touch it anymore?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great for me, my sensitive I use the example of, like, being 8 and being a sensitive kiddo, is nothing that I really consciously think about, and also it's something that in my life is who I am, and I've carried a lot of, like, shame and baggage, of being someone who feels deeply, and talking about that again from a therapy lens only felt so helpful. And doing this type of work has allowed me to feel almost just like more at peace with that. I don't know a better way to describe it besides like it feels integrated, it feels more safe, it feels like I don't have as strong of a reaction to it in my own body when it comes up for me. Like there's this free flowing of it when I think before there was like always resistance that I met with it of like, no, I don't want to be that. And like, no, what does it mean if I am like that? Or what does it mean if I'm upset in this situation? Or I'm really empathic in a way that no one else is experiencing. And now it allows it to just feel like that's who I am, and why am I gonna spend my time questioning and analyzing and placing judgments on that? And so, I think that's a great example of an area that just feels a lot more healed from some of these practices.
Yeah, that's really profound also in the sense that when we're talking about healing, we're not talking about changing at a fundamental level.
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
talking about
Mm.
making peace with who we are.
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
might still have really strong emotions or
yeah,
become really, really activated or feel really hurt or really sad or really angry. And it's not that now those reactions have been dulled, which is often the case with psychopharmacological intervention,
mm,
but that they're more fully allowed to be
yeah.
allowed to be a part of who you are.
Yeah, and from that, they don't really feel, like, out of control, right? There's not this, like, feeling about, "What does it mean if I feel that?" And I'm scared to feel that because, again, I've established safety of, like, if I feel sadness, I'm still okay, right? Like, I'm not worried about almost that that's too much, that then I have to use something like your eating disorder or another maladaptive coping skill, right, to numb that out. It's, "Okay, I can feel sadness and I can cry about this thing, and is that actually a threat to myself?" Right? No, I actually feel like then I'm not leaving myself to then have to return to myself. It's just my authentic experience.
The thing that I'm wondering about most as you're talking is relationships, because the ways in which we learn to close ourselves off or to shut down emotions are so much a relational process.
Yeah.
What was it like for you starting to bring that back into your relationships? I want to say, especially with family, because those are often the people who hold most of what we've struggled with.
Yes. Yeah. It's freeing. I think it's scary, because I think especially when you spend your life consciously or subconsciously trying to avoid that, right? And classically trying to be someone who like takes up less space, whether that's physically or emotionally. Very much one of my storylines. Um, it's scary to then feel like I'm not following that script anymore, right? It feels really raw. It feels really vulnerable. It feels really exposing. Um, and there's so much empowerment of like, it sounds so silly, but, like, I'm an adult who is capable of taking care of myself and emotionally, physically, right, all these ways, but there's so much power of, like, when we think about a baby, it's like you need someone to co-regulate with, right? Like, you have to engage in certain things to get your needs met, and as an adult, you no longer need that same type of co-regulation, especially from your family, and so being able to know, like, I can show up for myself in those ways decreases the threat decreases the threat of what does it mean if I do show up authentically? Because no one can hurt me in the same way that I think as a child, the fear feels like it can happen.
Yeah, the gut level fear is if I show up in this way, I'll be rejected by the people closest to me. And you've stepped into a place where even if they don't tolerate it or accept it in the way you may have hoped, there's a kind of ownership of what you're experiencing that makes that feel tolerable.
Yeah, and a feeling of like other people may not see me through the way that I see myself. And that's okay, right? Like, if I'm doing the work to see myself authentically as me, like, that is my piece, right? And so that I don't need to give that away to somebody else just because they don't see that. And so they could sit there and have a perspective that is different from mine, and that doesn't have to be a threat to what I believe about myself. Because if I am so certain of who I am, I don't need to also convince them of that. And so, yes, does it feel fantastic? Of course, when we are seen and validated and held by other people, absolutely. And also, it doesn't feel like as an adult, right, you're going to crumble when now somebody doesn't see you in that same light. And that might just be a microcosm of that moment, right? Of course, that doesn't have to be always, but I think again, it's just less fear and just more empowerment because it does feel like you know and understand yourself, and at the end of the day, that is the most powerful thing that I could ask of myself, and I think I'm always on a quest of just, like, continuing to feel like I know and understand myself as I continue to evolve and change.
Yeah, I can appreciate and value this experience, even if the people around me don't. When you're talking about being a more sensitive person and maybe crying more easily or and the relationship component of that, I imagine that was met by different people in different ways as you started to express it more. Can you describe some of the reactions you've gotten as you started to show up in that way? And also, to what extent, if at all, that influences how you show up emotionally in different settings when you're talking about, I can own and allow these feelings more. Are there spaces where you might do that more than others, or spaces where it still maybe doesn't feel safe because even though you've done that work in yourself, um, there's a kind of rejection that you know will happen?
Yeah, yeah, great question. Um, I think that especially I've moved a lot in my adulthood, and so I've had a lot of scenarios with that of, like, needing to make new adult friendships, which is very difficult for a lot of people. So I've had a lot of practice too of, like, seeing my involvement over time in building those new relationships because they're new, and so you do get to go into them, like, as the version of yourself, and that version of that person you're meeting doesn't always know what's happened 10 years before that, which I think is a really cool thing and also a really scary thing at times. But it's allowed me to meet people who are also craving kind of that same sensitivity and empathy, and have also been met with people who have not provided them with that space. And so it's less necessarily that like I'm like crying all the time, but more that like I feel things deeply. And that if I'm in a conversation with my friend, right, like not trying to be their therapist, but I am digging into it in a way that like I want to understand their experience and not just think I understand their experience. And so when I talk about sensitivity, right, it's things like that where then I may go home and I'm continuing to think about them and continuing to wonder like what their experience in the world is like and how do I understand that more deeply to then understand other people more deeply to then understand myself more deeply too, right? Kind of this revolving circle. Um, and so I find that people are way more open to it and often mirror back to me something along the lines of like gratitude. Gratitude for observing my ability for both sadness and joy, right? I think also being sensitive, you also feel joy very easily. And find really small moments of that in your life that I think also create profound impact on people because there's this trust too that there's not going to be a toxic positivity and there's not going to be a it's all sunshine and rainbows, right? That both sides of the coin exist. And that I'm never really going to be someone who talks you out of that experience. And I think the more we can just name our experiences and our feelings, as we know in therapy, naturally, like the more those feelings just subside. And so I think just creating containers and being a model myself of someone who's willing to do that and allow someone to see me as who I am allows other people to feel like they get to show up authentically
Yeah.
as themselves too.
And also because you're older and moving around, you're interacting more with chosen community
Yes.
than with default community, which feels like where I imagine it becoming more difficult or where I experience it being more difficult to bring things back or
Yes. Yes. Which is why I think it gets to be healing in a lot of ways because you are intentionally creating relationships that feel good to you.
yeah. I'm wondering about, and we touched on this before, and I don't know if you have the answer to it, but what I'm experiencing in this conversation and what I see a lot is there's a standard in Western medicine of what's considered legitimate. And a lot of the ways that that's been translated now is that we need to provide the science behind it and sometimes translate it into neurological terms, into terms that relate to the physicality of the brain.
Yeah.
And what we find in spirituality and in other cultures is that there is a different way of knowing. And there's a part of me that wants to just respect that for what it is without needing to translate it. That's where I start to wonder what kind of tradition this came from. And I know, like, with acupuncture has its roots in different cultures, or we have indigenous healing practices. Um, I know, like, I come from Jewish spirituality, and I experience a lot also of people is translating it or being like, hey, these are the like parallels we see between this and that. And there's a part of me that in some ways it's nice to be able to see like the overlap between things. And sometimes I wonder if it's disingenuous or in some ways almost like identifying the value system that this is the truth or the thing that is valid. And in order to make anything else valid, we need to translate it.
I love that concept. And I think that it's such a good thing to ask. And I definitely don't have an answer because I think too, I'm probably not as educated in some of those backgrounds of some of these things. And I think there's almost there's a level for me of like wanting to know things. And then there is that level, almost like you're saying, of what crosses the line in a way that becomes so intellectualized that then I think I do tap out of it. Of like, okay, I need to know enough to feel like I have buy-in and I can understand it on a some type of cognitive level for myself. And if I know too much, does that somehow make it something else that then disconnects me from the actual experience of it? Like if I think it's supposed to be a certain way or it's coming from a certain way, again, sometimes helpful, But for me, I think sometimes I find that to be limiting, and doesn't allow me to be as open and receptive to it.
Mhm. That makes sense, yeah. And the other thing that we start to bump into with spirituality is religion and all the different kinds of feelings people have about that, which is why meditation in our culture, and a lot of it originates in Buddhism, or we know that many spiritual practices have meditation within them. But when you start to name it like that, people get turned off oftentimes, either because they've had a negative experience with religion or because they're attached to a particular one and can't, or it feels antithetical to their values to connect to others. So that's when you do start to get into a more secularized version of spirituality that just allows you to tap into the practice as it is.
Yes. Yes, and all of the spaces that I practice spirituality, right, they're also flexible in allowing you to name whatever it is that you connect to, right? And so some of those places will name God, and some of those places will name the universe, and some of those places will name whatever it is that you want to name, and I have so much, gratitude for that because I think it also allows me to change and evolve in the way that I want to with my connection to spirituality or religion without it feeling like I have to understand that in this really specific, confident manner, which again opens the door to challenge just like the black and white thinking around it and belief system and allows me to feel like I don't quite know what that is and I don't quite know what my relationship to religion might be. And I also know that I do believe these things. And it's okay that I don't quite know what that means in some way, right? And that might not fit into a box. And it might fit into some of these boxes and not some of these other boxes. But how do I allow myself the flexibility to still be impacted by that and get what I need and find my spaces within that that do still got to help me, even if I don't understand the larger picture of it quite yet.
Yeah. I don't need to put myself into a particular box or associate myself with a particular group.
Yeah.
I can tap into this experience for what it is.
Right. And I think it's even in the spiritual like world per se, there are things that, right, we're comfortable at the beginning, right? I did sound healing. And then if I hadn't done that, I probably never would have been open to Biofield's tuning. I would have looked at that like that was 20 years down the road, if ever, of something that I would ever experience, right? And now I'm doing acupuncture, and not that it's a step-by-step process, but I do feel like they compound on each other that allows me to just continue to open my mind to what exists. And also, there's so many other things that I personally am not also in a place where I am open and receptive to, and I don't try to pretend that I am because again, I think that is what is so amazing about our evolvement is that over time, maybe that does change and maybe now those things also become tools that I have. And just because I am practicing these things doesn't also mean that I have to now be someone who does this other thing to be a good spiritual person either, right? And so it challenges, I think, again, just some of these really limited belief systems.
Yeah, where we start to get into groupthink, and this happens really in every area where if I believe in one thing, I need to believe with everything that is associated with it to be considered part of the group.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's another side of that, which I feel like is maybe the more positive. This is almost like the shadow side of it, which is community and history. So the feeling that as I'm doing this, and we start to find this in as being part of a community, and this is maybe something that religion offers, or even just like our own history. But when I'm doing this, I'm connecting to the people who did it before me.
Yes. Yes, I think there is so much community in it, and I think feeling, even in the present day, right, like, when I find somebody who is interested in some of these things or even open to them, right, like, that feeling, I don't even know how to describe it, like, it feels so powerful. And I think having this type of experience with somebody is so powerful where you don't have to explain it. And there is this knowing now between you and another human, right? Of like, wow, we both just did that sound bath together. And like words aren't even needed, right? It's just like the look we give each other after that we're like, oh my God, like, did you just feel that too? And someone else being like, yeah, right. Like it just transcends so much of like the talk in relationship and lets you feel like you are seeing someone else's soul and you are seeing them stripped away again from everything else. And I think that's such a gift that I've been granted with some people in my life who do believe in these things and who do also want to practice them and have them grow them. And I think we get to become mirrors to then share that with each other and use that for ourselves and our own growth as well.
Yeah, very powerful. Can you talk a little bit about the interaction between your therapist and to what extent do you incorporate this into your therapy work? What does it look like when people are doing both of them? And how do they each serve the person and complement one another? Or if
Yeah.
there are any areas where they start to conflict with one another as well.
Yeah. So I don't have anyone that's doing Biofield tuning. I would love to work with someone who is open to that. That would be such a dream to be able to do some of that together because I do think doing them simultaneously is really powerful. I think other spirituality practices that I see a lot of, like acupuncture, right, is something that I do talk to clients about, sound healing as well as like crystals. I have a lot of clients who are actively using crystals. Um, and I think what I've seen, especially with some of my like young adult clients who are open to that, um, they often feel like when their recovery is not in a positive place, their spirituality also has been lacking. And so a lot of times we use it as kind of a grounding object of like, okay, well, like, let's talk about your spirituality for a little bit. What has that looked like? And oftentimes they're able to identify, I've completely tapped out, right? Like, I have felt so depressed that I haven't reached for anything to allow me to have any type of positive connection because I don't believe I'm worthy of having that experience. And so now I'm not doing some of these things that I used to do to help me feel that. And so I think it's something that um, is almost like easily accessible when our defenses don't want to make other changes. And so when we don't want to say, yes, I'm willing to reduce my purging behaviors this week, often clients will say, I am willing to go back to meditation, or I am willing to go to a sound bath, or I am willing to now pull my crystals out and sleep with them under my pillow again. Um, and to me, again, that's huge, right? Like it's removing this idea that it has to be behavioral and it has to be CBT oriented to be the only effective solution. When if a client then comes back the next week and had this moment of connecting back to themselves and a higher purpose and whatever way feels specific for them, that's movement. And to me, at the end of the day, that's what I want to have them do, right? Is to feel connected to themselves and to feel like they can understand their experience in the world, because that is the thing that's going to help to continue to challenge their eating disorder. And so I think it's often an area that allows us to just tap into when other things feel too scary to necessarily do right away.
Yeah. We can start by strengthening the self and almost developing an internal anchor point or a place that I can come back to. And as we do that, it becomes more possible to start to shift some of what surrounds it.
Yeah, because if I make one small movement in this area, we know that then that has a ripple effect in all other things, right? And so if I believe that this crystal, let's say, is going to even just help me have deeper sleep, okay, I'm not just getting deeper sleep. I'm now focusing and concentrating better the next day. I'm now able to take care of myself better. And maybe now I'm going to wash my face before I go to bed because I'm actually excited that I'm going to sleep better, right? We start to see how all those things also add up. Um, and again, we don't even have to buy into that to do it, which I think is the part that gets to be so creative for a lot of clients, again, who sometimes struggle with having kind of that looseness in some of their healing work.
Yeah. Can you describe to me a little bit, and then we'll start to wrap up, but what you've seen the effect on symptoms as you work with someone to connect to themselves in a deeper way?
Yeah. I think so much less self abandonment is something that I talk a lot about, right? When self trust increases, self abandonment decreases. And I think we don't talk about self-abandonment enough with eating disorder work, but I think there is so much abandoning of self that is continuously happening. And so I think the more we are consistently showing up for ourselves and understanding ourselves, the more we know how to live a values aligned life, right? When we don't really know ourselves, we can show up in that way. And so then we're almost reacting to a lot of the things that we do instead of knowing that we've intentionally chosen them. And when we got to intentionally choose those things, we build our confidence in ourselves because now we're living a life that feels like ours, and doesn't belong to anybody else. And so I think that's a really big area that I see change. And I think coinciding with that is things like decreased depression, decreased anxiety are probably the top two areas, right? Of like when we have a calmer nervous system, those things start to feel lighter. Um, and we're not really pouring into some of those negative beliefs in the same way that continue to ignite the flame of them because we're starting to understand what that peace and what that safety actually means in our bodies in a visceral way that isn't me as a therapist being like, yeah, body safety and body trust. And they're like, yeah, I've heard that 500 times, right? Like, you can only talk about that sometimes so much with some clients who don't really understand it. But when you get to viscerally experience that, that now clicks into place all those other changes that start to happen.
Do you do sound healing with clients or refer them to it? Or like if I were walking into your office, what would I see?
No, I don't. And I've thought about it. And sometimes I'm like, does that take me away from enjoying the experience so much that I haven't done it yet? But yes, I will help clients like look for it because again, it's something that people don't necessarily know how to look for, and it isn't the same as therapy where there's like a psychology today and you just find all the sound healings, right? Like it is kind of a digging around to find them, but I will help them be able to try to figure out what that looks like, and try to just also, as with anything, like try something more than once because a lot of them are very different from each other. And sometimes you might not like that experience, but if you go again with a different practitioner, you might connect to that practitioner. And so also helping them to understand that component of it too.
Yeah. And you're someone as a therapist who people who have spiritual practices, and that's a big part of their recovery. They can come back and you can help them integrate that or translate that rather than it being like, okay, that's your thing or that's the outside of therapy thing.
Yes, I think it creates safety of like, even my clients with crystals again can feel a little bit like, they're like, this feels stupid. And when they see your reaction of that, not confirming that, right? And this idea of like, wait, you've done something like that, or like you believe in that, the defenses come down and there's so much safety that then gets to be built again in another layer within the relationship. And they don't also feel like, again, almost like they are doing something that has to compete with the work that we're doing in the room, right? It gets to just be another space that they get to access healing. That doesn't have to mean anything negative about the work that we're doing, right? It gets to be adjunctive and it gets to be, wow, what a breakthrough you had there that now we get to actually process together and help you integrate more into yourself.
Very cool. What do you want to leave our listeners off with?
Ooh, I would say to just allow yourself to be open to it, right? It doesn't have to look a specific way. And if you're curious about it, why not allow yourself to experience it? And why not allow yourself to give yourself an opportunity to really be in your body and start to connect to doing that in a safe, contained way, that has nothing to do with some of the other work that you might be doing in your eating disorder recovery that doesn't feel safe and contained. And when you do, a lot is going to come up, and that doesn't mean that it is bad, as we say for therapy, right? A therapy session isn't just good if you come away smiling and saying, I feel so much better. And so to also stick with it, if it is something that you want to give it a try.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dana.
Thank you so much. It was such a great conversation.